Hey, New Covenant. We're going to be looking at the first few verses in Hebrews 12. The main exhortation in these verses is found here. It says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Okay, so we're going to keep this idea in mind and see how are we to do this? What does it look like to endure the race that is set before us? Well, first, it begins, right? The first way it begins is by remembering that since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, right? So it says, therefore, referring to the contents in Hebrews 11, which gave us examples of Old Testament saints who persevered in their faith. So because we have this witness in the Old Testament about what faith looks like, we are to do two things. Lay aside every weight, referring to things that may be good in and of themselves, which we may do, but for maybe the season in life or a particular reason, we might not do as much of it, or we might lay it down because it's hindering us from following Christ. This week, think about what that might mean for you. What does it look like to maybe lay something aside that may be good, but is distracting you from following Christ? And also, it says, and sin which clings so closely, right? Flee sin. Run away from it. Put it to death. Right? So we run the race with endurance that is set before us by laying aside every weight and every sin which clings so closely. As you examine and study the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, but also as we're doing now in the New Testament, to see how we can follow Christ. And then we're also, it says, how else do we run the race with endurance? By looking to Jesus. And who is Jesus? Well, it says that Jesus is the founder and perfecter of our faith. Remember that our salvation is completely of the Lord, and he's going to see to it that we make it all of the way home. So look to Jesus, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Look to Jesus, who endured the cross. And one of the ways he endured the cross was because it says he did it for the joy that was set before him. So you too could lay aside sin and be willing to undergo any form of persecution and suffering, because you could look to Jesus and say, Jesus did this because of the joy set before him. Lord, help me endure. Help me put away sin for the joy that is set before me. Look to the future glory that shall be revealed. And it also says, consider him, right, that's Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Jesus was persecuted. He endured because of the promises that was set before him. You too can endure for the promises that are set before you. So the main exhortation is to run with endurance the race that is set before you. And you do that by laying aside every weight, by putting to death sin which clings so closely, by looking to Jesus as the one who is the perfecter and founder of your faith, who endured for the joy that was set before him.